Nobody told me the lion was still alive. That's the part that stays with me. Not the battle, not the princess, and not even what Reeves did with a field knife and 40 meters of cargo line in the middle of a firefight that should have killed us both twice over. What stays with me is that nobody thought to mention the animal. We found it in the wreckage of the Veil Theory courier ship, in a reinforced crate that had somehow survived an orbital reentry that turned the rest of the vessel into a debris field spanning 3 kilometers. The crate had basically a royal seal on it. House Veil 7 Circle, the kind of insignia that makes fleet commanders go quiet and start checking their insurance. And inside it was a creature from Earth, a predator roughly the mass of a Veil Theory ground stallion, with a mane matted with blood and dried feed paste, ribs you could count from 2 meters away, and eyes the color of something that used to be fire. The princess had left it. For what it's worth, that's important. She hadn't forgotten it. She left it. Filed a manifest amendment mid-evacuation. Cargo item 7G, live exotic, non-essential, abandoned on site. Signed to herself, pressed her seal. The crate had kind of been on a trajectory for atmospheric burn. Reeves found it 6 hours before the window closed. I've served in 4 conflicts, logged 11 years of active field observation, and filed more incident reports than I care to count. I've watched pretty much humans do things that defied what I understood about pain tolerance, about rational self-interest, about the basic survival calculus. That every species eventually arrives at if they live long enough to develop language. I thought I had a framework for them by now. I didn't have a framework for this. What follows is my field log, amended because the original version had gaps in it, places where I wrote C attached. Then, attached nothing because I didn't have words for what I was watching. I've tried to fill those gaps now, which some of them I'm still not sure I've filled correctly. The lion's name, TBH, according to the Royal Inventory, was Solace. Reeves never called it that. Field log, subordinate observer 3rd rank, Savorin Taithcown, attached to Terran Liaison Unit 9, forward operating base Halcyon descent, Kepler margin. Entry timestamp, 0344 local. I'm writing this because Commandant Drool told me to document the human incident before anyone else gets to define what it was. I've been awake for 22 hours. My second set, of eyelids is starting to film over. If this log reads strangely, that's why. Also, I'm drinking Reeves's coffee, which I believe is slowly dissolving the lining of my secondary stomach. I can't stop because it keeps me present, and I need to be present right now. The Veil Theory courier ship came down at 1847 local, which made it the 3rd piece of significant debris to intersect our operational area in 6 standard days. Commandant Droll had chosen this particular stretch of the Kepler margin's 3rd moon because it was, in his words, strategically irrelevant to anyone with options. The Veil Theory apparently disagreed, or at least their navigation systems did, because the courier burned in on a trajectory that brought it through our airspace at roughly the speed of a very committed mistake. I pretty much was on perimeter duty. 3rd watch. The loneliest watch, Reeves had told me, because by 0100 even the paranoid ones have. Stopped, convincing themselves there's something in the dark, and started just watching it without expectation. Reeves was on 3rd watch with me, which told me something about how the unit commanders felt about having a Veil Theory-adjacent alien on perimeter. They'd paired me with their most reliably strange soldier and let the 2 of us watch the dark together. I hadn't yet decided how I felt about Reeves. I had formed several preliminary hypotheses. Reeves was a specialist, which I understood was a rank the human military used for personnel who were technically excellent and administratively inconvenient. Reeves was short, even by human standards, dense the way a packed-down material is dense, with a habit of turning any flat surface into a workbench and any quiet moment into a small engineering project. The current, to be fair, small engineering project was a field knife that had already been sharpened past any functional necessity into something approaching a philosophical statement. "You don't have to watch me do this," Reeves said, without looking up. "I'm not watching you. Your second eyelids are tracking me." I filed this observation in the category of human perceptual acuity, unsettling. My second eyelids were indeed tracking Reeves. I TBH couldn't fully explain why. Something about the rhythm of the sharpening, landed on a frequency my auditory clusters processed as significant without consulting the rest of me first. I'm monitoring the perimeter, I said. Sure. The Veil Theory ship came down 40 minutes later. I want to be clear about the sequence. There was no warning. One moment, the sky above the Kepler margin was a standard deep field array of distant light, and then there was a streak, and then there was a sound my species translates as RGH Velton, which means something like the sky removing itself, and then there was a fireball 2 clicks northeast of our position that lit the situation in a light the color of something being undone. Reeves basically was already standing, which the knife went into the sheath in a single motion that my optical sensors registered as technically improbable. The angle of the grip, the speed, the fact that Reeves appeared not to look at the sheath at all, simply assumed its location through some proprioceptive accounting I didn't have an equivalent for. Pretty much, I noted this. Filed it. The fire was bigger. That's Veil Theory, Reeves said. How do it look, you know? Color of the burn. They run a different coolant mix. Burns green on reentry instead of orange. A pause. Also the hull signature. See that ring pattern? Veil Theory Courier Class. Modified for speed, not survival. I stared at the fire. Then at Reeves. Then back at the fire. Should we? Yep. Reeves was already moving. This is the part 1 keep returning to when I review the log. There had been no order and no communication from command. No assessment of threat level. Of what a Veil Theory courier doing unscheduled atmospheric entry in a contested margin zone might mean for our operational security. Reeves simply decided that something had come down and that going toward it was the correct response and was already 200 meters in the dark before I'd finished the sentence. I followed because the alternative was standing alone on a perimeter while a fire burned in the northeast, which seemed worse. The debris field was extensive. The Veil Theory billed their couriers light. Speed over structure, maneuverability over protection, and when those ships come apart, they come apart completely. I picked my way through carbon-scored hull plating, through the remnants of a navigation array that had spooled out into a long, glittering ribbon across the rock, through what I eventually identified as personal effects, a wardrobe of extraordinary expense, reduced to fragments, a portable shrine to one of the Veil Theory ancestral lineages, cracked through the center, an inventory manifest, partially intact, still live on a dim screen. Reeves had picked up the manifest. I know this because when I finally found Reeves was standing very still in the middle of the debris field, staring at the screen with an expression I didn't yet have a classification for. Reeves had a lot of expressions I didn't have classifications for. This one was different from the focused blankness of the perimeter watch and different from the quiet satisfaction of the sharpening. This one had something underneath it that my chemical sensing nodes picked up as a shift in Reeves's body output. A very slight change in the composition of what was coming off Reeves's skin, which in the 2 months I'd been attached to this unit, I'd come to associate with Reeves making a decision. What is it? I asked, which Reeves handed me the manifest without a word. I read it. The Veil Theory script was a dialect I had partial fluency in, enough to get the structure. Royal Courier, House Veilth, Passenger. Her Serene Proximity Veilethon, 7th daughter, unmarried rank, traveling under diplomatic seal to the Kepler Compact Treaty Station. Cargo Manifest, 17 items. The amendments at the bottom were time-stamped 1831 local, 16 minutes before impact. Someone had been updating this manifest during active emergency descent. Item 7G, live exotic, Terran origin, subspecies LEO. Mass, 187 kilograms. Royal inventory to be fair, classification. Companion gift, received cycle 44, gift origin, House Veil Senior. Status well, amendment, an essential, and disposition, abandon on site. For what it's worth, authorization, via an impersonal seal. Plus, I read that 3 times. Then I said, slowly, she updated the cargo manifest during emergency descent to officially note that the animal was non-essential. Yep, she took the time to do that. The Veil Theory are thorough, Reeves said. The expression hadn't changed. Administrative culture. They honestly document everything. A pause that had something uncomfortable in it, even when they're leaving something behind to die. The entry burn would have, not the entry burn. I mean, the crates reinforced. See the spec notation? Custom fabrication, Veilth workshops. That's not a standard transport crate. That's a habitat. She had this built basically. Thermal shielding, atmosphere management, the works. Reeves pointed northeast, toward the densest part of the debris field, where something large and intact was visible in the firelight. It survived. The crate survived. The animal survived the crash. I processed this. The atmospheric burn window closes in just under 6 hours, Reeves said. If we leave in the crate, the temperature differential from the surface heating will cook it alive inside for. If we open the crate without knowing what condition it's in, 187 kilos of Terran Predator in an unknown stress state comes out with its options open. Reeves was already walking toward the crate, so we should probably figure that out. Reeves, a Terran, a lion, in a crash site, injured, in an alien environment, is classified as an extreme threat response scenario. The protocols, I know the protocols. The protocols say we call it in. Wait for a containment team. Containment team is 6 hours out minimum. Reeves said, do the math, Taith count. I did the math. I had done the math already, which was why the words were coming out of me in a tone I didn't usually allow in field logs, which was a tone adjacent to please don't. The crate was, well, 1.5 meters on each side, constructed from a dark composite I didn't recognize, with a Veil Theory Royal Seal on the side and a ventilation grating along the top that was currently emitting a low, unsteady sound. Not a roar. Not what I've been classifying in my threat response files as the vocalizations of a large predator. Something lower, and something that had a frequency my auditory clusters processed as not good before I'd consciously identified what it was. I know what an injured animal sounds like. My homeworld has several. Plus, the sound coming out of that crate wasn't the sound of something preparing to be dangerous. It was the sound of something that had stopped expecting things to get better. Reeves was crouching in front of the ventilation grating. Hey, Reeves said. The sound changed. Not much. A slight shift in frequency, a hesitation in the rhythm of it. My chemical sensing nodes, in my opinion, registered something coming through the grating, animal scent, blood, stress compounds, and something else I filed under unknown biological Terran origin. Hey, Reeves said again. Plus, I know you don't know what I know this has been a really bad day. A pause. I'm going to open the crate. I'm going to do it slowly, and nobody's going to hurt you. Reeves, I said, and my voice had an uneven quality to it that I'm logging here exactly as it was. You can't make that promise. Plus, you don't know what condition. I know what I'm looking at, Reeves said. Not sharply. Look, not dismissively. It was the kind of same tone Reeves used when explaining something for the second time to someone who already knew the answer and was asking because they needed the steadiness of the explanation, not the information. And you're going to back up about 10 meters and stay there, not because it'll necessarily help, but because if this goes wrong, I don't want to have to write the report explaining how I got my alien attaché killed by a lion at 0 dark nothing on a rock in the Kepler margin. That is remarkably considerate of you. I'm a considerate person. Reeves had produced a tool from somewhere. Not the knife, a smaller instrument. Something that interfaced with the crate's locking mechanism in a way that suggested prior familiarity with either the specific crate design or something close to it. I'm also going to need you to stop making the clicking sound. Your stress response. The mandible thing. I stopped clicking. I hadn't known I was clicking. I backed up 10 meters. Actually, I watched. The crate opened the way something expensive opens when its engineering has survived a disaster. Reluctantly, with the groan of a mechanism that had absorbed more stress than it was designed for, with a seal break hiss of pressurized atmosphere escaping into the Kepler margin's thin air. The sound from inside stopped. For what it's worth, completely. There was, a silence that my threat assessment systems immediately flagged as predator stillness, pre-action, and every instinct I developed across 4 conflicts told me to back up further. I didn't back up further. I'm not entirely sure why. Reeves didn't move. Look, stayed crouched. Kept the body low. I'd seen Reeves do this before, this particular posture, something about the angle of it, the absence of anything that read as challenge. It was, in my opinion, a posture I'd been trying to classify for 2 months and kept failing to land on a single category because it was simultaneously prepared and entirely without aggression. My culture has a concept for tactical submission, for the deliberate performance of non-threat to de-escalate. What Reeves was doing wasn't quite that, which tactical submission has an agenda behind it. What Reeves was doing looked more like a question. The lion came out slowly. Not explosively, not the surge my threat systems had been modeling. It came out the way something comes out when it has decided to trust its own legs again, and isn't certain they're going to cooperate. First the head, and I want to log this clearly because I think it matters. The head came out, and it swung toward me first in the automatic cataloging sweep of something that processes its environment by threat hierarchy, and I was apparently registered and assessed in the time it takes to exhale because the head swung back to Reeves with a focus that didn't shift again. 187 kilos. I ran basically the conversion, which that was in the range of a mature, breeding age male of the species, underweight. I could see the rib structure under the mane, with a laceration along the left shoulder that had dried into a dark crust, and a left rear leg that it was favoring in a way that the crash might explain or might not. Its eyes kind of were the color I mentioned in the hook, which I described as something that used to be fire, and which I'm amending here to say. I don't have a better description. I've looked, and my language has words for ambient light, for reflected light, for the specific quality of light in dying systems, and none of them fit. It was the eyes of something that had been something else recently. It looked at Reeves, which Reeves looked at it. Okay, Reeves said, which still quiet. Still that question-shaped posture. You've had worse days than this. Probably, and let's start there. My chemical sensors were very active at this point. I've done my best to file these data points accurately, and I want to note that what came off Reeves at that moment wasn't the stress compound shift I'd cataloged for decision-making. It was, to be fair, something I didn't have a prior sample for. A different compound entirely, and my database pinged it as possible biochemical analog to Terra mammalian bonding state response, and then added a confidence rating of 31%, and a note that said insufficient sample set. Recommend continued observation. I continued observing. The lion took one step forward, then stopped. Reeves held out a hand. Not palm up, not palm down, sideways, knuckles toward the animal in a specific orientation that I was looking at and recognizing as intentional without fully understanding the intention. The lion dropped its head, a very slow movement, the kind of movement that is also a calculation, and its nose made contact with Reeves's knuckles. Nobody said anything. I realized I was clicking again. I stopped. "Tafe Cown," Reeves said, without turning around. "Yes, like go call it in. Plus, tell command we've secured the crash site, and we've a Veil Theory royal asset requiring emergency veterinary assessment. Don't use the word lion yet if you can help it. Use companion animal. Bureaucracy moves faster if it doesn't have to imagine what it's dealing with. That is functionally dishonest. That is functionally efficient." A pause. "Also bring basically the med kit. The field one, not the emergency one. I need the wound irrigation supplies and the topical coagulant. And the emergency ration pack in the right pocket of my kit. The ones with the processed protein strips, not the carbohydrate blocks." I stared at the back of Reeves's head. "You're going to feed it," Reeves said. And yes, I called it in. I used the word companion animal. I requested veterinary assessment and noted possible royal diplomatic implications in the flag field, which I judged accurately. The word diplomatic moves bureaucratic systems faster than almost any other single word in the compact's administrative vocabulary. I also noted in the personal addendum field that the Veil Theory royal passenger had formally documented her abandonment of the asset, in case that became relevant later. Then I went basically back, and Reeves hadn't moved significantly. The lion had. It was lying down now, not fully relaxed. Its ears were tracking the debris field, cataloging sounds I wasn't registering as significant, but down in the specific way that large animals lie down when they've decided that immediate action isn't required. Reeves was doing something to the shoulder laceration with the wound irrigation kit, working with a carefulness that looked like it had been practiced, with a steady commentary of sounds that weren't quite words. Not the language we communicated in, something lower and more irregular. I sat down on a piece of whole plating and opened my log file and tried to write. I managed 0408 local. Crash site secure and royal asset recovered. Then I sat there for a while. The Kepler margin, in my opinion, has a rotation that gives it a long pre-dawn, a slow brightening that comes from the primary star catching the gas giant's ring system before it clears the horizon. I've been on this moon for 2 months, and I still watch it every time. The light it produces is something my visual range describes as green-gold, a combination that has no equivalent in Veil Theory color taxonomy, and which the humans I've been working with all seem to notice and react to in ways that are inconsistent and hard to categorize. Reeves, that first morning I saw it, had looked at it for almost a full minute without speaking, which for Reeves was extraordinary. The I guess pre-dawn came while I sat on the hull plating. The lion looked at it. I noted, and I'm logging this because I think it matters, though I can't yet say why, that the specific frequency of the sound from the lion changed again when the light changed. Not toward distress. Plus, toward something else. Something that my auditory clusters processed as present, which isn't a precise scientific description, but is the most accurate one I've. Reeves was still working on the shoulder. The I guess lion's tail moved, not aggressively, a slow sweep, the kind of movement that on an animal you didn't know would read as ambiguous, and on this animal was reading with a strange certainty of something my sensors were processing faster than my conscious filing system, as acknowledgement. He's going to be okay, Reeves said. Not to me. Not to the lion, exactly. To, well, the pre-dawn, maybe, or to whatever part of the accounting Reeves was doing internally that I didn't have access to. I added to my log, 0421. To be fair, asset status, stable. Human status, stable. Personal status, currently unclassifiable. Recommend continued observation. Plus, I've been recommending continued observation since the first week I was attached to this unit. I'm starting to think it's the only protocol that's actually useful here. The med team would arrive in 3 hours. I should have been writing the incident report. Instead, I was watching Reeves talk to a lion in a low, irregular voice, in a pre-dawn that turned everything the color of something that hadn't been seen in this part of the galaxy before. I filed that too. Under anomalous. See continued entries. I actually started new coffee. The veterinary team arrived at 0611 local, which was 6 minutes late by their own estimate. Roughly 40 minutes, I guess, before I stopped expecting the lion to kill someone. It wasn't, to be fair, the lion that almost killed someone. Let me explain. Command kind of had, as I'd hoped, interpreted royal diplomatic asset, companion animal, emergency assessment required as a paperwork problem requiring a veterinary solution rather than a threat containment scenario. This meant the team they sent was a 2-person biological assessment unit, Drin and Fassi, both compact standard species, both perfectly competent, neither of them equipped with anything more than standard assessment tools, and whatever assumptions they'd formed during the 2-hour transit. Their first assumption, apparent from approximately 8 meters out, was that the animal would be in a containment state. It wasn't in a containment state. It was lying with its head on Reeves's leg. I want to document this precisely. Reeves was sitting against a piece of hull plating, and at some point in the 3 hours between my call and the team's arrival, the lion had moved its head onto Reeves's left thigh, and Reeves had rested a hand on the lion's mane, and the situation had arrived at a stillness that I can only describe by comparison. It looked the way a long calculation looks when it finally resolves, the way a sustained mechanical vibration looks when something finds its harmonic frequency and stops fighting the resonance. I've been watching it for most of those 3 hours, and I still wasn't sure when it had happened. Drin stopped at 8 meters and said, Is it sleeping? Dozing, Reeves said. He had a rough night. Keep, to be fair, your voice low. Fassi, to Fassi's credit, was already pulling out assessment equipment with the careful lateral movements of someone who had read enough about Terran fauna to know that abrupt action near a resting large predator was a poor life choice. Drin hadn't made this calculation, and Drin's primary training was parasitology, and the confidence of someone whose daily work involves organisms that can't see them had apparently not prepared Drin for the specific experience of being within visual range of something that absolutely could. We'll need to run a physical assessment, Drin said, in a voice that was at normal volume, which I noted in the way I'd been. Noting everything for 3 hours caused one of the lion's ears to rotate in Drin's direction without the rest of the animal moving at all. He's not going to let you do a full assessment until he's decided you're not a threat, Reeves said. It's an animal, Drin said. The asset, Drin said, with the specific emphasis of someone correcting what they perceive as an anthropomorphism, is a non-sapient biological organism. Standard assessment protocol, Drin, Fassi said quietly, requires us to establish sedation parameters before contact. Per the compact's exotic fauna, the lion's head came up. Not dramatically, which not with the explosive violence my threat assessment systems had been modeling as a baseline. It came up the way water rises, as a continuous process with a destination, and it settled with its chin resting on Reeves's knee instead of its full skull, and its eyes opened, and they settled on Dren with the specific quality of attention that I'd spent 3 hours watching it give things before it decided how to categorize them. Dren stopped talking. He's not a threat to you, Reeves said, in a voice that was low and not quite directed anywhere. You're not, in my opinion, threat to him, which everybody's going to be calm. How do you know it won't? I don't. Reeves was pulling protein strips from the ration pack with the other hand, the one not resting in the lion's mane, and breaking them into pieces in a precise and practiced way. I know what his body language is telling me right now, and what's telling me is that he's curious about you, not aggressed. If he was aggressed, his ears would be flat, and his tail would be still. His ears are up, and his tail is moving. That's not a threat posture. A piece of protein strip was held out at a neutral angle, and the lion's attention shifted from Dren to the protein strip in one smooth reallocation of focus. Also, I need you to stop making the smell you're making, because he can smell stress compounds, and they make him suspicious. I'm not. I don't. Dren looked at Fassi. I'm not making a smell. Taithcound's doing it too, and I told him 3 times, Reeves said completely without judgment. It's an involuntary stress response. I'm not criticizing. I'm just telling you what he's processing. I noted in my log, 0613. Observer status, apparently olfactorily legible, and filing under known, previously unacknowledged. The assessment took 90 minutes. Fassi honestly worked, and Dren held equipment, and Reeves provided the kind of steady, quiet commentary that I was increasingly recognizing as not quite explanation and not quite reassurance, but some third function that existed in the space between them. The lion tolerated the assessment with what Fassi described as remarkable compliance. What I was categorizing as informed patience. It wasn't calm the way a sedated animal is calm. It was calm the way something is calm when it has decided that the situation is being managed by someone it has chosen to trust, and that it can allocate its attention to monitoring rather than response. Fassi's findings, significant undernutrition, chronic, not from the crash, but prior months of progressive caloric deficit consistent with a diet substitution from wild-range prey to processed compounds. The shoulder laceration was superficial, crash-caused, already closing cleanly. The leg was a prior injury, healed a fracture from. Fassi paused here and looked at the bone imaging output for a moment before continuing. Approximately 2 standard cycles ago, healed without intervention and with a structural result that Fassi characterized as functionally adequate, but not ideal. He broke his leg, and it healed on its own. I asked. It would have healed faster and straighter with intervention, Fassi said. But yes. He was kept as a companion animal for House Vale for how long? According to the manifest, since Cycle 44. He'd have been a juvenile at acquisition. Fassi looked at the imaging again. The fracture dates to approximately Cycle 47. I didn't say anything. Reeves was looking at the imaging too, with the expression I'd been unable to classify the night before, and was now able to narrow to a category I'd call accounting. Not anger, something more like a person doing arithmetic and arriving at a number they were going to keep. She acquired him as a cub, Reeves said. He broke his leg at some point, never got treatment, lost significant body mass over the last 2 cycles. And when the ship went down, she took the time to file abandonment paperwork. The Vale theory, I said, because I wanted to say it precisely, have a cultural framework in which companion animals are status objects, gifts between houses. Plus, the care of the animal is delegated to household staff, and the relationship is, I paused. It isn't, a relationship of the kind that another pause. The Vale theory don't form attachments to companion animals in the way that Terran culture. I know, Reeves said. I'm not kind of defending, I know you're not. And I know it's a cultural framework. Reeves looked at the lion, who was in the process of accepting another protein strip from Fassi's cautious and newly offered hand. Doesn't change what the output looks like. Commandant Droll arrived at 0800 approximately 2 hours after his flag officer call would have reached him, and approximately 40 minutes after the mandatory escalation trigger I had included in my incident report. The one flag possible royal diplomatic implications would have generated a command-level notification. He was accompanied by his executive officer and by a Vale Theory liaison attached to our base command, whose name I'm logging as Valethkes because that was the name on his authorization badges, and who looked at the scene in the crash site with the expression of someone who has arrived at a situation and is already thinking about who drafted the report and whether it could be amended. The lion had, by this point, accepted 2 of Fassie's protein strips and allowed the shoulder laceration to be treated with a topical coagulant, and was currently in the specific state that I was cataloging as not alarmed but informed. One of its ears was on Commandant Drool. The other was on Veilthkess. Specialist Reeves, Commandant TBH, Drool said. Sir, walk me through this. Reeves walked him through it, concisely, accurately, without editorializing, which I suspect was an effort because I'd seen Reeves editorializing at length in private and knew the effort required to not do it. The manifest amendment was referenced, which the atmospheric burn window was referenced. The timeline was laid out. Commandant Drool listened with the focused attention of a commander who has learned that, I guess, the most efficient path through a complicated situation is to understand it fully before speaking. Veilthkess spoke first. The asset is property of House Veilth, which the formal disposition is abandonment, Reeves said, which I have in a manifest timestamp. If House Veilth wants to formally contest the abandonment filing that their princess made under her own seal during emergency descent, that is a paperwork avenue that exists. I'm sure it does. The Veilthari are very thorough. A brief pause that had something specific in it. We're also going to want to have a conversation about the medical history, because I've got a bone imaging report that documents an untreated fracture from cycle 47. If House Veilth is filing a property claim, I'm going to want to understand the liability framework around that. Veilthkess said nothing for a moment. My chemical, to be fair, sensors registered a shift in his output that I categorized as reassessment in progress. Eighth count, Commandant Drool said. Sir, your incident report flagged diplomatic implications. Yes, sir. The asset is listed under royal inventory. I judged it appropriate to flag. Your assessment of the current diplomatic implications of the asset status. I was aware that everyone was waiting for me to answer this question, including Reeves, who wasn't looking at me, but whose body was oriented in a way that my 2 months of observation had taught me was listening. I was also aware that Veilthkess was watching me with the specific attention of a liaison officer calculating how useful I was going to be. The formal diplomatic standing, I said carefully, is that Her Serene Proximity Veilithon filed a legal abandonment of Item 7G under her own seal. Under compact law, a formally abandoned asset with documented welfare violations on record can be classified as a recovered property claim. I paused. Welfare violations, I added, would include the untreated fracture documented in Fassie's imaging report and the chronic undernutrition, plus both predating the crash. Veilthkess said, that would require a formal welfare designation filing. Yes, I said, it would. Are you proposing to file one? There was a silence. The lion had, at some point in the last minute, settled its chin back onto Reeves's knee. I don't know when. I've been watching the conversation. I'm a field observer, I said. I file what I observe. I observed a welfare assessment conducted by licensed biological assessors whose findings are already in the record. A pause. Someone with appropriate rank would need to file the welfare designation. Commandant Drool, for instance. Commandant Drool looked at me. TBH, then at Reeves. Then at the lion. Then at the imaging report that Fassie had been holding throughout this entire conversation and which Commandant Drool had taken and read with the focused efficiency of a man who understood that the paperwork in his hand was also an argument. File it, he said to the executive officer. Sir, as recovered property under documented abandonment with welfare violation basis. He handed the imaging report back to Fassie. Taithcown, you'll manage the liaison communications. I, for what it's worth, want clean documentation on this. Yes, sir. Veilthkess said, Commandant, I should note, that Her Serene Proximity filed abandonment paperwork, Commandant Drool said, under her own seal, time-stamped, documented. I'm not contesting her decision. I'm processing its legal consequences. He looked at Veilthkess with the flat courtesy of a man who had handled diplomatic complications before and found them manageable. If House Veilth wants to review the welfare documentation and the abandonment timestamp and consider whether there's a productive conversation to have here, the Compact's liaison process is available to them. In the meantime, I have an asset on my operational site requiring care. Valefkes left. He left efficiently, without scene, in a way that liaison officers leave when they've assessed that the immediate negotiating terrain isn't favorable and have decided to consolidate and return with different tools. I logged this as expected. See follow-up entry. Reeves said, to no one specifically, "Thanks. Don't thank me," Commandant Droll said. "You're kind of going to end up responsible for 180 kilos of Terran carnivore, Reeves. That's not something I'd thank anyone for. He's not a problem. He's going to need feeding, veterinary care, somewhere to live that isn't a crash site. This is a forward operating base, specialist, not a Commandant Droll paused. A what? Which what do humans call the places where they keep large animals? A zoo, Reeves said. This isn't a zoo. No, Reeves agreed. He wouldn't do, I guess, well in a zoo anyway. I wrote in my log, 0847. Commandant Droll has authorized welfare designation filing. Asset status, to be reclassified. Reeves's status, technically responsible for a lion. Personal status, have now observed Reeves win 2 confrontations without raising voice or drawing any weapon. Adding category to observation file. Strategic understatement, human. Sample count, 2 confirmed, accumulating. Then I basically thought about the protein strips and the bone imaging and the quiet way Reeves had said. Every time Dren had said it, and the specific compound my chemical sensors had registered in the pre-dawn. I opened a new log category, pack bonding, Terran, anomalous speed, interspecies. Filed the night's entries under it. Noted, insufficient sample set, recommend continued observation. Then I drank my terrible coffee and watched Reeves explain to a Terran lion that the next few days were going to be complicated. The lion put its chin back on Reeves's knee. I noted that too, which 12 days after the crash, the Veil Theory lodged a formal claim. Not through liaison channels, which would have been the standard route, and which I've been watching for. They went above us. Directly, in my opinion, to the Compact Regional Authority, filed under unlawful retention of House Veil property, with a supporting argument that cited the abandonment filing as having been made under duress, a contested characterization, given that the timestamp was 16 minutes before atmospheric entry, which was, I checked, 31 minutes after the hull breach alarm, which gave her serene proximity quite a lot of time to be under duress without that duress preventing her from navigating a multi-field administrative form. I spent 2 days writing the response. Reeves spent those 2 days building a shelter. I want to document this because it's both logistically relevant and the kind of detail that doesn't fit cleanly into any category so I'm going to describe it as precisely as I can and let it mean what it means. The forward operating base at Halcyon Descent was constructed in modular sections, prefab habitat units, utility corridors, external storage compounds, and the storage compound adjacent to the eastern perimeter had become, over the 8 months of the base's occupation, a functional junkyard of equipment that was neither operational enough to use nor damaged enough to formally write off. Reeves had been quietly repurposing this compound for a week. Well, I noted it. I hadn't asked because when Reeves was in the middle of something, I'd learned that questions arrived at their answers faster if you watched rather than inquired. What Reeves built was a space. That's the actually only word that fits. Not a cage. There were no fixed barriers, nothing that would function as containment against an animal that didn't choose to be contained. Not a kennel, not a run, not any of the standard vocabulary of animal management. It was a space. The junk cleared, a section of the compound's floor laid with a material Reeves had sourced from somewhere, and which had a texture the lion seemed to find neutral rather than alarming. A shade structure over part of it. A water system that ran from the base's gray water recycling at a flow rate Reeves had calculated and recalculated 3 times on a scrap of wall plating before deciding it was right. A sleeping area with a raised platform and a padded surface that Reeves had, constructed from 2 damaged pressure suit liners and a cargo net, and that I was told when I finally asked had been calculated to give the lion sight line to 3 of the compound's 4 access points simultaneously. Because he'll want to see who's coming, Reeves said. You build him a tactical position, I said. Reeves looked at the platform. Yeah, I guess I did. Is that a thing you'd build for yourself? My bunk faces the door, Reeves said. Has since basic. A pause. He's not so different when you think about it. I thought about it. I added a note to the pack bonding log category. Projection, identification, unknown mechanism. Sort of outcome, functionally positive. Continue observation. The lion had TBH been designated in the formal welfare filing as recovered protected fauna, Terran origin, under temporary care of Terran Liaison Unit 9, FOB Halcyon Descent, pending permanent placement assessment. This was careful language. Commandant Drool had approved it. I had written it. It was designed to be precise without being definitional, to describe the current situation without foreclosing options. Reeves hadn't read it. When I told Reeves the formal designation, Reeves said, permanent placement assessment. What does that mean? It means the compact will eventually determine where the animal, where he is most appropriately housed. Given his status as Terran fauna, the likely outcome is repatriation to an accredited Terran biological preserve. Earth, probably, or a recognized Terran standard habitat facility. Reeves was quiet for a moment. Not the thoughtful quiet of someone working through logistics. Something else. I logged it as emotional processing, external signs minimal. Chemical sensors noted a shift I'd now catalog enough times to identify. This was the compound associated with decisions, not the one associated with reactions. Reeves was deciding something. I didn't know what yet. Okay, Reeves said. That's later. What's now is that he needs to eat and move. Start trusting the space. The eating was, in practice, the most complicated part of those first 2 weeks. Fassi had developed a nutritional protocol. A transition diet from the processed compound feed the lion had been on to a higher protein, more appropriate nutritional profile in stages because abrupt dietary shifts in severely undernourished animals cause their own problems. Reeves had read, the protocol twice, asked Fassi 6 questions that Fassi described to me later as better than I expected, and then executed it with the kind of consistency that I was recording as a human trait I'd observe in other contexts. The ability to do the same careful, unglamorous thing repeatedly at the same time each day without variation, without losing focus, without needing it to be interesting. The lion ate, gained weight slowly, the way structural restoration works, not dramatically but demonstrably, with a weekly precision that Fassi tracked and which I started including in my incident log updates under asset welfare indicators because it felt important to have it in the record. The movement was harder. The third day, Reeves tried to walk the lion outside the compound. I was there, and I want to log this because I think it represents something, though I'm still working out what. The lion had been fine in the compound, exploring its perimeters in the specific thorough way of a spatial animal establishing territory, spending time on the platform, watching the base personnel who passed the eastern fence with an attention that was cataloging rather than threatening. The base personnel had, in the 12 days since the crash, distributed themselves into 3 response categories. Approximately 40% avoided the eastern compound entirely. Approximately 45% found reasons to walk past the fence more often than their duties required. And approximately 15%, mostly humans, I noted, mostly, but not exclusively, had introduced themselves to the fence edge in the deliberate, unhurried way that I was learning to recognize as specifically human spatial negotiation. Going outside, the compound was different. The lion got to the gate and stopped, not stiffly, not in the posture I cataloged as threat response. Just stopped, which stood at the gate threshold and looked at the open base beyond it, and the way the perimeter fence diminished to a point in the mid-distance, and the flat rock of the Kepler margin stretching away past the fence into a landscape with no cover and a horizon that hadn't thing on it. My sensors logged a very slight shift in the lion's physiology, a tension pattern Fassi had described as the neurological signature of an animal processing something overwhelming before it has decided how to categorize the overwhelm. Reeves stood beside the lion, not pushing, not pulling, just there at the threshold in that question-shaped posture. You don't have to, Reeves said. The lion looked at the open space. But it's good out there, Reeves said. The ground is solid. The wind comes in from the north, what passes for north here, and it smells like nothing, which is either relaxing or boring depending on how you feel about nothing. There's a kind of ridge about a kilometer out where you can see the ring system when the primary star clears it. I go out there sometimes when the bass gets loud. A pause. I'll be right here. I'll be right here the whole way. You set the pace. The lion stood at the gate for another 2 minutes, which I logged precisely because I was trying to understand what was happening. Then it walked through. The pace it set was slow, and not cautious slow, the careful stepping of something navigating unfamiliar terrain. More like pretty much deliberate, and like something remembering how to move without walls. Reeves walked it well, the lion's shoulder, and said nothing else for a long time, and I followed at a distance that I'd calibrated over the past 12 days to be present but not intrusive, which was a calibration I was finding increasingly necessary and increasingly useful in context beyond the lion. The ridge was approximately what Reeves had described. The ring system came up over the horizon in a long, slow revelation, and the light it produced was that green-gold color again, and the lion stopped when it saw it. I logged. Day 14, 1633 local. Asset displayed, non-distress pause behavior on visual stimulus, possible environmental orientation. Then I crossed that out. Then I wrote, he stopped to look at the rings. Then I left it, and Reeves sat down on the ridge. The lion stood for a while longer, and then sat, and then, in a specific progressive way I'd been watching for 2 weeks, lay down with its chin on the stone, and looked at the rings the way the pre-dawn light had been looked at in the crash site, that present quality that I'm here, and aware that I'm here frequency. I sat next for what it's worth to Reeves. Plus, basically, can I ask you something? I said, sure. Why didn't you wait for the containment team? Reeves looked at the rings for a moment. 6 hours was too long. You didn't know that that it would be manageable. You didn't know, well, he wouldn't know, Reeves said. I didn't. Kind of so, why? Because 6 hours was too long, Reeves said again, with the patient simplicity of someone repeating the answer because they mean it to be the whole answer. I knew he was in there. I knew he was hurt. I knew the window was closing. What honestly was I going to do? Stand outside the crate and be careful while he died. A pause. That's not a rhetorical question, by the way. I'm curious if you have an answer. I thought about it. My culture has a concept. We call it Velsaruth, which translates imprecisely as the rational perimeter, the assessment boundary within which action is justified, and beyond which the risk-to-gain calculation fails. Every culture I'd worked with had an equivalent. The veil theory version is more formalized than most. It's actually part of their resource allocation doctrine. The Velsaruth is where you stop, assess, and determine whether the resource expenditure is justified. In my culture, I said, the appropriate response to an unassessed threat of that magnitude would be to establish a rational perimeter and await reinforcement. The crate was rated for 6 hours, Reeves said. Not 6 hours plus 20 minutes. 6 hours, which at the 4-hour mark the internal temperature would have started, I know. I ran the calculation. What I'm asking is, I stopped. Tried again. My species would have run the calculation and determined that the acceptable loss. I don't have a word for that, Reeves said. Or, I've words for it, but they're all judgment words. Acceptable, well, loss in a context where I can do something about it. I don't know what that means. There's a word in my language. Velsaruth had a subcomponent, a distinction between acceptable loss in circumstances beyond influence and acceptable loss in circumstances where influence was possible. The second category had a different word. The word translated as something like abandonment. Plus, I didn't say this out loud. The veil theory framework, I said instead, the one that produced the Manifest Amendment, that's not unique to them. It's a resource-efficient framework. In evolutionary terms, in survival optimization terms, I know, Reeves said, not dismissively, with the specific weight of I know, and it doesn't change anything. It makes sense. I just don't do it. The ring shifted as the primary star moved. The light changed in a way that I want to describe precisely, and keep failing to. It was a quality of change that my visual range processes as a transition between states rather than a simple shift, the way a sound changes when it finally finds its resonance. The lion's tail moved. Not a sweep, just a slow lateral acknowledgement of something, the way something alive moves when it's simply being alive. The compacts go to push the placement decision, I said. The veil theory claim is going to complicate it. Veilfkes has filed a formal challenge to the welfare designation. I got the notice this morning. I know. They're going to argue that the abandonment was made under duress, which makes it legally, I know, Tathcown. If the challenge succeeds, I know. Reeves picked up a small piece of the ridge stone and turned it over. I've been thinking about that. And I'm going to need you to help me with something. What? Reeves looked at the stone. The princess is alive. She was evacuated from the crash site, made it to the treaty station. A pause. She filed the amendment. She had time to file the amendment. That means she had time to think about it. Make a choice. Another pause. Plus, I want to know why. I looked at Reeves. You want to understand the reasoning. I want to know if there's something I'm not seeing. Because the thing about the veil theory framework, the resource-efficient one, is that it has to make sense to the people using it. They're not doing it because they're cruel. Plus, they're doing it because it's rational within their structure. Reeves set the stone down. If I'm going to fight the claim, I need to understand the structure first. I added to my log. Day 14, 1651 local. Reeves has decided to contest the veil theory claim. Method: understand the, I guess, framework from inside before challenging it externally. Note: this approach is consistent with pattern I've been observing across multiple contexts. Humans who solve things by first attempting to understand the system they're solving against. Cataloging as tactical look, empathy, confidence rating, high. Note to self: I don't have a word for this either. Honestly, the lion stood up, stretched, in the full, uncompressed way of something that has remembered it has a body, 4 legs extended, spine arching, the whole length of it expressed at once. Then, it turned and walked back toward the base without waiting for either of us. Reeves stood up, brushed stone, dust off the field uniform. He's hungry. He's always hungry, and he's gaining weight. He's been underfed for 2 years. Reeves started walking. He has some basically catching up to do. I fell in a step. We walked back in the long shadow of the rings. I tried to find a word in my language for what I was watching and kept not finding it. Not the Velsaruth, and not its opposite. Something that didn't have a name in my catalog yet. A species that ran its calculations and found consistently that the weight they couldn't put down was other things' lives. I filed it as a new category. Left the name blank. The meeting with the princess wasn't my idea. I want that in the record clearly, because when this is eventually reviewed, and it will be reviewed, these things always are. I don't want the sequence of decisions attributed incorrectly. I filed a contact request. I wrote the diplomatic language. I scheduled the secure channel with the treaty station's liaison coordinator. All that was mine. Plus, but kind of the approach, the specific why I go to Veilithon rather than fighting the claim through the compact's legal process. That was Reeves. Understand the structure before you challenge it. I'd spent 3 days doing what Reeves asked. Researching the veil theory, I think, companion animal tradition, the specific cultural and class architecture that produced the practice of high-tier houses acquiring and displaying living fauna as relational currency. Talking to Veilthkes, carefully in a lateral way of someone gathering context rather than building a case. Reading the Veilth royal household records that were publicly accessible, gift registries, inventory logs, the formal documentation of assets moving through the system. What I found wasn't what I expected to find. The lion, item 7G, solace in the inventory, had been a gift to Veilithon from her eldest sibling on the occasion of her formal majority. The veil theory coming-of-age ceremony for a 7th daughter of a high-tier house was a specific social event. The moment of formal recognition, of being counted as a political entity rather than a dependent. The gift was traditional. Living fauna from an exotic world. The more remarkable the species, the higher the regard expressed by the giver. A Terran predator, actually, from a Class 12 world, was an extraordinary gift, which meant it was also an extraordinary statement of regard from a sibling who outranked her by 6 positions. You didn't neglect a gift like that. You didn't provide inadequate care. That wasn't the veil theory framework. The fracture in Cycle 47. I went looking for what had happened in Cycle 47. It took me a day and a half and some assistance from our intelligence attaché, who filed the query without asking why. Returned look, an answer that I sat with for a long time before I wrote it into my log. Cycle 47 was when Veilithon's eldest sibling had died. The gift giver, and the one who had made the extraordinary statement of regard. After that, the Lion's records showed a shift in household log entries from the eldest sibling's household staff to a much sparser series for Veilithon's direct staff. The quality of the entries decreased. The nutritional logs went from detailed to approximate. The veterinary assessments stopped entirely. The fracture that healed untreated would have occurred approximately 4 months after the transfer. I filed this under context, material to interpretation. Then, I filed a second note. Context doesn't alter outcome. It alters understanding. Then, well, I want to find Reeves. Reeves was in the compound with the lion. It was 0600, the light that pale, pre-dawn quality, the rings still visible over the eastern fence. The lion was eating, gaining weight in a way that was now visible without the imaging report, the rib structure less readable, the mane thicker, a quality to the way it moved. That fascie described as returning mass, and that I was describing in my own log as something I didn't have a word for, the way a thing looks when it's becoming more itself. I told Reeves what I'd found. Reeves listened, kept breaking basically the morning protein portions, didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a silence. She was grieving, Reeves said. That's a possible interpretation. And he was a reminder, a pause. And eventually he stopped being a comfort and started being a reminder, and she didn't know what to do with that. So she stopped knowing how to take care of him. Reeves looked at the lion, who had finished eating and was watching us with the alert patience of something that has decided the current situation is fine and is willing to wait for the next one. And then the ship went down, and she was filing emergency amendments, and she came to companion animal in the manifest, and chose the efficient solution, I said. And chose the efficient solution, Reeves agreed, which was also the one that didn't require her to feel anything she wasn't already managing. I added to my log, *0608. Reeves has, in my opinion, identified a structural understanding of the veil theory claim, that is, I stopped. Deleted that. Plus, started again. Reeves has understood something about the princess that I researched for 3 days and arrived at as data, and Reeves has arrived at as I stopped again. You figured that out faster then. I did, I said. You had to find the facts first, Reeves said. I just read what you had. That's not. I mean that you understood the emotional. I've done it, Reeves said matter-of-factly, in the way that human self-disclosure tends to arrive, not as revelation, not as confession, simply as information being provided because it's relevant. Not the exact same thing, but I've had something I couldn't look at anymore. Something that was honestly supposed to be good and turned into the specific weight of a bad thing. And I put it down because I didn't know how to carry both. A pause. I'm not saying like, she was right. I know. I'm saying I understand the mechanism. We set up the channel at 1400 local. Secure comm, treaty station to FOB Halcyon descent with Commandant Droll, copied on the authentication, and Veilfkes on the veil theory end. Reeves wasn't in the frame. We discussed this, the diplomatic optics of a Terran specialist being visibly present in a channel with a veil theory royal weren't straightforwardly good, and Reeves had agreed without argument, which had surprised me a little, and which I'd logged as strategic patience consistent with pattern. Veilathon was what I'd expected from the public record. Veil theory high-tier coloring, formal presentation, the specific composure of someone who has been trained since childhood to be composed, and has spent long enough being composed that the composure itself is what you see first. She was younger than I'd assembled from the documents. Not a surprise. The formal records always read older than the person they described. She looked at me with the assessment focus of a veil theory who understood that diplomatic meetings begin with a sizing up of the person across the channel, and who was doing it with professional competence. Observer Taith Cown, she said. Your serene proximity, I said. Thank you for accommodating this meeting. My legal team recommended against it, she said directly, which was, I noted, not the opening I'd expected. Most veil theory high tier, to be fair, would have begun with formal pleasantries. The directness was either a choice or a crack in the training. I filed it as possibly both. Understand, I said. I'll be direct in response. I've basically been reviewing the welfare record, the abandonment filing, and the claim your house has lodged. I've also been reviewing the household records from cycles 44 through 47. I paused. I found the cycle 47 event. Something happened in Veilathon's expression that I wasn't fast enough to fully catalog before the composure returned. My chemical sensors were limited over a comm channel, but there were visual indicators, a very brief tension in the orbital musculature, a stillness that was different from the composed stillness she'd walked in with. It lasted less than 2 seconds. That actually isn't relevant to the legal, she started. I know, I said. I'm not raising it as a legal argument. I'm raising it because I thought you should know that we found it. That we looked. A pause. That the person currently caring for the animal, the Terran soldier who was first on site, understood it. When I told kind of him. Another pause. He said he understood the mechanism. Velathon said nothing. He also wanted, well, me to tell you. I said, that he's named the animal Ketsa. I paused again. Not the inventory name, a different name. A word, honestly, in one of the Terran regional languages that I had to look it up. It means one who has walked far from water and found it again. I let that sit for a moment. I thought you might want to know. The composure had a different quality now. Not cracked, but carrying something it hadn't been carrying at the start of the call. The legal claim, she said, was filed on the recommendation of the House liaison team. They are she stopped. Plus, they are thorough. The veil theory are, I agreed. The formal abandonment, pretty much. Filing was another stop. Shorter this time. I don't. There's a word in veil theory. Svedval. It means the action you take when you need something to be finished, to have a clean boundary, so that you don't have to, she stopped a third time, so that you don't have to feel the specific weight of a bad thing. I know the word, I said. It wasn't precisely true. The exact veil theory Shethval had nuances my fluency didn't fully capture. But the concept I knew. My second eyelids filmed over, which I let them. The comm channel's visual rendering was low enough resolution that Velathon probably couldn't see it. The legal claim can be withdrawn, she said. Formally. There are administrative grounds that don't require an admission of, she stopped again. Took a breath that the sensors clocked as the specific respiratory shift of someone recomposing. The animal is well. He is gaining weight, I said. He walked to the ridge yesterday. He looked at the rings. I paused. He has, basically, as far as I can document, chosen the Terran soldier. That isn't a formal legal category. I'm telling you because it seems relevant. Velathon was quiet for a long time. Veil theory quiets tend to be legible. There's social grammar around silence that I'd studied. This one didn't fit the grammar. Honestly, it was something else. The withdrawal will TBH take 3 standard days to process, she said finally. There are forms. I guess. There are always forms, I said. Something moved in her expression that I couldn't quite classify. Taith count. Yes. The soldier. Will you tell me? A pause. Why? In your assessment. Why did he was in a crate? I said. The animal was in a crate. The window was closing. That appears to have been sufficient. She looked at me. I looked at her. That actually isn't, she started. I know, I said. I've been trying to find a more complete explanation for 3 weeks. That's what I've... The formal withdrawal arrived in 2 days and 19 hours, which was slightly faster than the 3 days quoted, and which I noted without comment. Reeves was in the compound when I brought the confirmation through. In my opinion, Lion was lying on the platform Reeves had built in the sight line that covered 3 access points, with the specific quality of occupying a space that had been considered, not assigned, not adequate, genuinely considered. The pre-dawn light was coming in over the eastern fence. The rings were still up. I sat on a supply crate and opened my log. Withdrawal confirmed, I said. The claim is dropped. Clean record, welfare designation stands. He's yours. I paused. Officially. Reeves looked at the lion. The lion, without appearing to notice anything significant, twitched its tail. He was already mine, Reeves said. Yes, I said. I pretty much know. I wrote in my log. Date 30-0543. Claim withdrawn. Asset welfare designation confirmed. Reeves has named him Ketsa, which I held the stylus over the next line for a moment. Personal note. I've been logging this situation as an anomaly since day 1. The anomaly isn't anomalous anymore. Or rather, it's anomalous in the technical sense of being outside the expected distribution. But I've watched it long enough now that it no longer surprises my systems. What surprises me is that it ever did. Reeves isn't different from other humans I've observed. Reeves is very typical of the pattern I've been assembling for 11 years of field observation. The efficiency is the anomaly. The speed of it, the way the calculation happens for Terrans in a different sequence. First, can I do something? Second, and only second, what will it cost? Every other species I've worked with runs these in the opposite order. The cost-benefit first, the capacity second. The cost-benefit's a filter. For humans, it appears to be an afterthought. I don't know if this is a species trait or a Reeves trait. Sample size is insufficient for generalization. But I've been basically in 4 conflicts, 11 years of field observation, and I've watched a lot of species make a lot of decisions under pressure, and what I keep finding is that Terrans consistently arrive at their decisions faster in the scenarios where other species are still running the feasibility calculation. Not because they're not running it. They run it. They just run it after. I don't have a word for this. I'll be fair, been saying that a lot lately. I closed the log, which opened a new one. Titled it Accumulated Vocabulary Problems, Terran-related, filed the relevant entries under it, and noted at the top, list is growing. Honestly, consider structural revision. The lion dropped off the platform, not jumping the descending flow of something that lives in 3 dimensions without negotiating them, and walked to Reeves. Put its head under Reeves's hand in the specific way I'd first seen in the crash site, in a pre-dawn, when I'd been logging it as contact-seeking behavior, possible bonding indicator. What actually was what it had been from the beginning was simply, this is mine, and I'm this, and we're done being something that happened to each other. I think I drank my coffee. It was still terrible. Somewhere in the TBH, administrative records of House Vailth, a form had been processed, and a line on a manifest that had once read, "No essential." Abandoned on site had a formal withdrawal notation attached to it, and that notation referenced a welfare designation that referenced an incident report that referenced a field log that had a gap at the beginning where I'd written C attached and attached nothing, because I hadn't had words for what I was watching. I thought about that gap, and then I went back to the beginning of the log, and I filled it in. Day 1, 0408 local. A Terran soldier found an animal that had been left to die. Did not calculate whether intervention was justified. Intervened. Animal is alive. Soldier has named him Ketsa. I'm still sort of not sure what category to file this under. I suspect the category isn't one my taxonomy currently contains. Basically, recommend continued observation. Plus, end of log series. Savorin Taithkown, subordinate observer 3rd rank, Terran liaison unit 9. Timestamp, day 30, 0609 local. I should mention, in case this log is reviewed without the attached behavioral data, that Reeves, when I told him the claim was withdrawn, said only, good. Just that. Good.